engagement consulting firm that specialises in the practice of all things community and stakeholder engagement. Before I begin our webinar, I would like to acknowledge that we meet on various lands of traditional owners. I myself located on Wurundjeri Woiwurrung land, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present and acknowledge that respect and pass on that respect to any other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that are joining us here today. So welcome to the webinar on unlocking housing. This is quite the topic. Today we are joined by Robert Pradelin, the founder of Housing All Australians, and we're going to have a conversation with Rob in a few moments. Throughout the webinar, we want to keep this as interactive as possible. So if you have any questions that you would like to put to Rob, please use the Q&A function on the Zoom toolset there, or simply throw in your question on chat. And we'll try and get through to most of those questions towards the end of the webinar. So engaging in social, affordable and public housing has been a mainstay of the work we do here at Capea, whether it's engaging housing tenants on workable models and design of housing, to working with state and local governments in identifying land use opportunities and all the allied supports and services that they need to be co-located with affordable housing, to facilitating regional-based strategies to address needs. There's obviously a lot happening politically in this space as well. The Commonwealth is delivering a $2 billion social housing accelerator to deliver thousands of new social homes across Australia, alongside the $10 billion Housing Australia Future Fund. Here in Victoria, and like many other states, there are equivalent programs and schemes, including the Big Housing Build, which is committing to building 12,500 new social and affordable homes here in Victoria. There's lots of public debate about the role of incentives and taxation systems to reprioritise the housing market to affordable housing, and many other initiatives and solutions. And before I go down too far into the depths of housing affordability crisis, I'd like to introduce Robert Pradelin, the founder of Housing All Australians. Recently, Rob released a landmark report called Give Me Shelter, and it highlights the scale of the problem that we are confronted with. The cost of unaffordable housing will cost over $25 billion per year by 2051. When people don't have secure, safe, affordable housing, we see impacts to physical and mental health and the on-costs to society that comes with. We know that businesses can't keep key staff within a sensible commuting range. There are impacts to education outcomes for younger Australians who are in vulnerable housing situations. And a lack of housing fosters a whole range of behaviours and antisocial behaviours that impact our justice system. However, if we were to address affordable housing across our country, the benefits would be astronomical. We're talking over $110 billion return on investment. For every dollar we invest, there's at least a $2 return benefit, which outweighs the investment performance of many other types of infrastructure. And so we're still confronted by the challenge that while Australia's population has grown by 25% or more between 2001 and 2016, the nation's stock of occupied social housing has shrunk by 2.5%. And if nothing else changes, more than 2 million Australian households on low incomes in private rentals will be in housing stress by 2051. They'll be paying rents in excess of the international benchmarks against their income, and that we will have to deal with much more grading housing costs than this. Rob, this has been an enormous project for you to embark on, but can you tell me about Housing All Australians and what was the moment where you decided to tackle this challenge?
Well, thank you, Matthew, and thank you for the opportunity of sharing some of our thoughts with your listeners. And some may have heard this before because I do say pretty much the same thing. But a couple of points before I get into that. The 25 billion that you mentioned is extra on top of what we pay now, and it's in today dollars. And my concern is our future generations won't be able to afford it. So therefore, Australian values get watered down because we're heading for a lose-lose scenario. But Housing All Australians will start off a whole number of little events. But the one that I sort of refer to is that, I'm a property developer. I'm a capitalist. But just because I'm a capitalist, it doesn't mean I don't care about vulnerable people. And there's a lot of people like me. And when I was at Frasers or Australand, selling housing, apartments, and land to the private sector, like most Australians, I assumed our governments were looking after our vulnerable people. And they weren't. And I'm in the industry. And so the more I delved into this, once my curiosity was sparked, I realized that we are going backwards, and this has taken 30 years to get to this point. And even if we do something, it's going to take 30 to 40 years to get out. And currently, what's been happening, as much as people trumpet it, it's only a drop in the ocean of what we need. And it doesn't really mean we've started that journey yet to get us out of this issue. So Housing All Australians is a private sector initiative looking at housing homeless through an economic lens, because there's enough doing the social justice side, which is very important. There's also an economic angle that Treasury must need to speak to Treasury. So we're focused and we're very clear on mission drift. We're about organisations that are aligned with making sure that housing is fundamental infrastructure for a prosperous future Australia. And they're the people that are getting behind us to shape a new narrative in our long-term interests, not in the political 3 and 4 year cycle. And that's the difference that I think we offer. But there's a whole range of little vignettes that sort of form the whole story. But the main one for that context of that report was based that I didn't know what I didn't know until I learned it. So our job is now to try and educate people about what we've learned, and hopefully some of that stuff resonates. And we start to turn what I'm calling respectful unrest through education. Because without respectful unrest, there is never any political self-interest. And the last point I touched on that issue, we were involved with making a documentary called Undercover that is still on the ABC iView, and it was narrated by Margot Robbie. It was about women over 50 being the fastest growing cohort of homeless in Australia. And it shows you that they could be like our mother, our sister, or our daughter. I advise everyone to, before it gets taken off, because ABC iView takes it off after a period of time, have a look at the documentary, because in Australia, how we allow that to happen to vulnerable women, let alone the other cohorts, is inexcusable. And we are helping to facilitate community screenings to try and get that respectful unrest happening. So Matthew, I think I'll leave it there because I can talk for a long time on this subject.
Thanks, Rob. So you're in the market. You're a property developer. You're a capitalist, and you formed a view that perhaps not enough is being done here about this problem, and it's such an immense problem. I mean, where do you start? Where did you, in particular, start? Where was your initial focus when you kicked off this initiative?
Well, the initial sort of one of those little vignettes, I was having a cup of coffee with my daughter at De Grave Street, opposite the Flinders Street station. And this homeless person came up and asked us for some money. And we gave him a few coins, but it started off a bit of a conversation. A few nights earlier on one of the news channels, there was a story. And the story was how the Flinders Street station, the grand hall above the station, had been empty for 10 years. And I turned to my daughter, I said, I wonder how many buildings in Melbourne are empty. Started working with the City of Melbourne to launch housing, and I'm cutting a story short. They rang me one day and said, look, the ABC News has heard the story and they want to push the idea through the news. So I rang the journalist back. We did a shoot in the ABC. In fact, interesting enough, the ABC headquarters was undergoing renovation. So they said, let's shoot it in there. So it was on the ABC News, it was on Neil Mitchell. Then I started getting calls from people, from very wealthy families all the way through to a homeless person that found me through LinkedIn and everything in between. And they all said something very similar. They said, we know we've got a problem. Just tell us what you want us to do. But one of those phone calls was from a board member on Casper Care. They just built a new aged care facility and the old one of 52 rooms was sitting empty. So he said, Rob, does that suit your model? And I said, look, It does. Let's have a look. And again, cutting a long story short, with the City of Port Phillip, YWCA, we refurbished 32 rooms of that facility with Metricon and their subcontractors for free. And we gave it to the YWCA to manage vulnerable women, some of which are in the film. In 4 years, the YWCA is now helped over 130 women stabilise their lives out of those 32 rooms at no capital cost. Hanson Yunkin is now going back, and they've started works to do the remaining 20 rooms for free. We've got Mirvac working with us with Housing First and a charity called Bridget that are refurbishing 14 empty vacant apartments sitting on Housing's First asset register that they've got no money for refurbishment. We've got CoBuild refurbishing an empty convent on Mercy Health land, which is part of a future expansion of hospital, but they don't need the convent for 10 years. We've got Better Living Group that's just finished, would you believe, 31 empty apartments in South Melbourne. That's worth the refurbishment about $700,000, and we've spent 30 to 50 grand. This is all private sector donating goods and materials and their labour for free. Dulux, CSR, they're all helping out because they want to. We'll never solve this philanthropically, but we show government we don't need them when we do something. And hopefully through that, we start to get action, because I've had recent conversations with Homes New South Wales, with Rebecca Pinkstone. I've been having conversations with Victoria. I think New South Wales is probably going quicker than Victoria, unfortunately, as much as this is my hometown, but this is a community-wide problem, not a government problem. And unless we all get together collectively, and that includes business, we're never going to solve this for future generations.
I want to touch on some of the successful partnerships that you've mentioned and that you've continued to build through Housing All Australians. I just wanted to sort of touch back a little bit more on the kind of the nature of the challenge. The Give Me Shelter report highlights numerous challenges and issues to solve. In your journey and through these conversations, what do you see the fundamental challenges to Housing All Australians?
One is acknowledging that we are all part of the problem and that we all have to be part of the solution. We can't have the vested interest groups, and I'm talking the property sectors as well as the councils, as well as local government. We have to all get together collectively and actually swallow our pride of it and say, let's work out a solution where we all might not be happy, but we can reckon we can make it work. Because if you don't do that, one link of the chain will be lost and you're not getting the collaboration. You know, I'm on the board of Homes Tasmania, and I won't go into that because we've got an election at the moment, but I think Tasmania could actually be the pilot for Australia to help end homelessness and use that data to shape future housing policy. Why? It's the only state where its levels of a number of people on the waiting list is about 4,700, but the current government went out with a 10,000 home target by 2032. No other state has that proportion. It's the other way around. And there's a whole other reasons why Tassie could be a good pilot. It's an island state. You can actually measure it. We should get behind, as a country, we should get behind one state to help end homelessness and measure the economic and social benefits. Then we can use it to shape future housing policies. We have to be bipartisan in the way we approach these things in the long-term national interest, not in the political interest of any parties, because I think Australians are tired of the same old stuff that happens in the papers every day. And maybe it's reflective of my age and I'm being a bit impatient, but I think we're over people doing it for political reasons, and we have to find the long-term interest of our country.
It's yeah, I mean, you describe, I suppose, a system-wide scale of problem, and you know, it strikes me in your initiative, Housing All Australians is a challenge that everyone's playing a role in, or could be playing a better role in. You know, whether that's developers, local government, mum and dad investors, banking and superannuation sectors, state and federal governments. We've all got to come together to tackle this problem head on in a collaborative partnership approach. I mean, you've been working with a range of partners to unlock private sector capital, for example, for affordable housing. While it's still in its early phases, the Progressive Residential Affordability Development Solution suitably nicknamed PRADS for short, is supported by a range of industry participants, including local government, as a way of unlocking alternative sources of funding for affordable rental housing without that use of a government subsidy that you speak of. One of the enabling kind of innovations of this solution is the PRADS register. It's an innovation that allows government to have oversight around the obligations for the term of agreement or condition around those properties, allowing developers the ability to, say, sell affordable rental home to an investor. And this is sort of an opportunity to unlock that private sector interest and that capital to deliver affordable housing. Can you tell us more about the PRADS model and how's the solution tracking?
Yeah, look, again, in simple terms, the model is saying that affordable housing needs a subsidy of some way, shape, or form. Traditionally, that's been done by government, again, in some way, shape, or form. Now, councils, and this is why the MAV are a big supporter of this model, councils have the levers that actually allow for additional density, subject to proper planning, that adds additional value to land with no cash. That additional value becomes a subsidy for the affordable housing, and then it gets locked in on title for a period of 30 years via restrictive covenant, because we're trying to do one system around the country because industry just wants one set of rules. And then in theory, that can be sold to a mum and dad investor in Timbuktu. And the digital register, and for simplicity's sake, those of you that know NRAS, assume NRAS is actually fully digitalized web-based portal that doesn't require any spreadsheets or not spreadsheets, attachments to be sent to verification, which is very much a manual process because we use NRAS at Frasers. That digital register will then notify local government if non-compliance is detected, because there's a process that real estate agents or CHPs must follow to input the information, as well as tenants. It starts to unlock it because government has not got unlimited funds. If you accept on face value that the register works with this restrictive covenant, what it does is allows the obligation for affordable housing to be locked in for the term of the agreed negotiation between council and developer. Then, because you can sell it to mum and dad investor at a lower price because it's locked in a percentage below market rent, then you've just unlocked private sector capital, not government, to fund affordable housing. And one of the big supporters of this, and it's in that pack that I've sent you, which I'm happy for you to share if you want to, the Commonwealth Bank have acknowledged that this is going to unlock private sector capital. The Municipal Association of Victoria said this has got really some legs to actually work with, and they're currently talking to the ALGA because it needs to be national. Home, the build-to-rent operator, says by using this, we can show council we're complying with their requirements for affordable housing, but we want to manage them all ourselves. Realestate.com says we've got a role in this as well because we want to promote affordable housing through our real estate agents. So if you connect to the existing ecosystem with the level of transparencies and governance, you can achieve both outcomes. And the real thing from a national perspective is that, and I love the community housing associations, but this is so big, it requires the whole ecosystem to actually be activated. But in regional Australia, you may not have a CHP. Does that mean they don't have affordable housing? Well, you've got a council, a developer, and a real estate agent, and the register. You can create affordable housing anywhere in Australia by collaboration. And unless we can have that collaboration amongst all the stakeholders, it's not easy. We will never solve this long-term housing crisis for this country. And that worries me as a parent.
It's certainly at it's at that point where affordable housing is going to be one of our key democracy risks. There is plausibly a future where insecurity in housing is going to lead to people questioning whether this system of government and democracy is there for them or there for someone else, I expect. You go.
I totally agree with you. In fact, I've got a probably slightly more impactful view. I think we're heading for civil unrest at a point in time if we do not do something. And that's in no one's interest.
With the PRADS model, tell me about some. Have you had any opportunities to see it implemented? Are there any particular case studies that you think are worthy of sharing, where we're actually seeing a net benefit to developers for increasing the amount of return they can get on a particular property development? Returns to local government and supporting any of their targets and policies to community itself. Can you give us some case studies of PRADS in action?
In fact, the development of this model has been happening for several years since I left Frasers, and I was there about 8 years ago. And before we launched it, we want to have a proof of concept. So you work with innovators like Nightingale Housing. And Nightingale took the principles of the model and worked with the city of Marybeck. And in a site in Coburg, I think it's Coburg, they had an incorporated plan approved by local government with 2 planning density outcomes. Nightingale does 5% affordable housing as standard. They approached council and said, look, if you can give us 2 extra levels, we can go from 5% to 15%. And they said, and that doesn't change our feasibility. And the city of Marybeck approved it. So we've got a proof of concept with Nightingale Housing as to how the model can actually work. So it is possible. And we're now working with the Valuer General potentially, because what that does need at some point, if you're going to do it at scale, is the independent arbiter that that's a fair outcome for a public local government. So once you close the whole ecosystem, you show it can be done. It's been done before. In New South Wales, the New South Wales Premier is talking about 30% density uplift. The biggest criticism that he's been facing is that, how do you know in 10 years' time it's going to remain affordable? Register solves it all. And PEXA, who's the digital conveyancer, who will start off as a COAG initiative and now as a listed company, have said, we want to help you. One of our aims is to actually end homelessness. So PEXA is building and managing this in the short to medium term, all pro bono. So we're getting a lot of corporate support in trying to help and use their skills or services in trying to help shape this conversation and make some meaningful outcomes.
So you've been able to pull together, I suppose, a system that works for developers and creates an opportunity for developers to negotiate with local government to increase the proportion of affordable housing. And it strikes me that there's a lot of goodwill and incentive within the private market to drive these sorts of initiatives forward. What's your kind of key message for local government? We've got a number of people on local government on the call today. I'm interested to sort of hear, what's your sort of call to arms for them?
Well, I've seen the list of local government. We've got Hobsons Bay, City of Bendigo. There's a whole range of them. And I can tell you, I am talking to developers in your LGA that would like to do this with local government. They all fear that local government doesn't trust them and local government doesn't trust developers. So there's a lack of trust in this whole thing. Without trust, we will never solve this issue. So this is something that we all have to collectively solve. I gave a presentation to a Pitcher Partners breakfast of 200 developers and builders, all wanting to do affordable housing. But they said, but we're not charities. We bought this piece of land in good faith, and you can't change the rules on us. Otherwise, there's an upward pressure on pricing. So we have to work out a way where we don't detrimentally affect anybody. We have to do it within the planning regime outcomes. We need to do it so it doesn't impact in the short term the developer's feasibility, and I do believe in inclusionary zoning, but it just needs time to be implemented so they can factor in purchase. And from local government, you want to make sure that you get the housing outcome. It is possible. We must use technology to actually expand how we do it at scale. And rather than recreate the ecosystem, we have to use the existing one with transparency to make sure people do what they say they're going to do. By doing that, the call to action is that let's go and do it together. Let's do it collaboratively, but let's not die wondering, because the only future that we lose by doing that is not ours. It's our grandchildren's, and I'm not prepared to let that happen without putting up a fight.
Well, there you go, everyone. There's the opportunity. It sounds like we've got many of the ducks lined up. Now, we've got a few questions coming through, Rob, and I really appreciate those people that are posting questions on the Q&A functions. Please send some more. The first question's from Michael Dehaan. Hi, Rob. I've researched super funds that actively invest in affordable housing overseas due to scale and return. What are your thoughts around building scale and a risk of return for super funds in Australia to support this initiative?
Yeah, well, in fact, this morning I got off the phone with one of the super funds about the model. And one thing that most of the audience that I asked this question most presentations. I asked the audience how many people know that our super funds have billions of dollars invested in housing Americans and basically zero in Australia. And it's all about the system, the financial system. In the UK and America, the housing systems are very, very different. And so the returns are much higher because they've got it factored into the purchase of the property before they buy it. That's why you can't compare apples with apples. Super funds want to invest in affordable housing, but they're obligated to get a minimum return based on the risk. So once those thresholds are actually met, then the super funds will divert the capital to invest in here. What the current government's doing through HAF, it's providing the market with a top-up income. In other words, there's a rental from the property, the top-up income to get market rent, and that should attract funds to do it at scale. At the moment, though, we've got a blip in the building industry that our building industry is imploding while Australia's going through a housing crisis. So there's going to be some other hurdles in terms of viability, pricing, etc. But one thing I can guarantee you based on that report, in some ways, it doesn't matter how expensive the current housing is. It's cheaper than the long-term consequences. And that is something we have to always think about. Even if it's expensive now, we should invest and do it because the long-term economic benefits far exceed the current investment.
Thanks, Rob. Our next question's from Roger Cooper. How well informed are councils about understanding and executing Section 173 agreements for affordable housing that have all stakeholders on the same page? Are there generally agreed terms for what affordable housing is defined as?
I think the definition is probably something that we as a country need to actually do because everyone's got a different definition and we need to get some uniformity on that. Section 173s in Victoria are the best instrument we've got, but it's not ideal. And in my discussion with councils, they hate Section 173s because they have to actually monitor it. And currently they monitor it all on spreadsheets, by the way. This is part of the reason for the digital register. And by the way, our workshops are the City of Port Phillip, City of Yarra, and City of Melbourne. That's the workshop group. So they're the best instrument we've got, but not many people actually understand it. They use the pro forma provided by government. And then there's always tweaks to it. We need to get one standard across the country because that way a Mirvac or a Lendlease, who I am speaking to, knows the set of rules, knows it's actually whether it's a Section 173 in Victoria or whatever, it's a restrictive covenant that's national, that's got some teeth that in case someone breaches it, they get financially penalised. And we have to change the current rules because, I'm not saying for changing it, because the teeth involved with Section 173 doesn't really do it, in my view, and based on my discussion with council. Again, if you want my long-term view, because legislation takes time, it's a national approach, just like NRAS, where the federal government legislated the NRAS governance criteria that's got teeth and financial penalties that the states then have to implement. That way we get one set of rules. But yeah, Section 173 is what people use, and in the people I've spoken to, we've used it a few times, but it's not the best instrument if we had to start from scratch.
But it's useful for what we've got, and it sounds like, to an extent, it's workable.
Yes, it's workable, but not ideal.
Another question from Janie Morris, and just touching on to your point earlier, Rob, about the fastest growing cohort of homelessness, women over 55. This demographic also has a high percentage of women who are actively involved in business, both as employed as well as self-employed, yet many are still couch surfing. What ideas, solutions are being enacted in order for them, despite their age, to be able to access affordable housing in the future? And how do we work with financial institutions to reduce ageism issues?
Again, we've got to find ways to deliver affordable housing. And this is part of that affordable housing model, is how do we create new supply that allows people like the working women that you just mentioned to find affordable housing that's actually suitable to their job. it is all about key workers and essential workers in the affordable housing space, finding places close to their work so they can actually perform it. One of the ideas we're prosecuting, and I won't go into too much detail, but there's 13 million empty bedrooms that exist around the country. Just unlocking 1% is 130,000 rooms that are probably so well located because I'm a pensioner. I've got a place in Oakley that's close to all the shops, etc. And my kids have left home. But under the federal government taxes, if I rent that room out to a key worker that lives and works close, my pension's at risk. Or my capital gains tax status on my family home. So their accountant says, don't do it. Yet if I'm an expat and I live in a $10 million home and I leave Australia to work overseas and I come back, I've got 6 years free capital gains tax. It doesn't make sense to me in a housing crisis. We need to use existing infrastructure, which is existing homes or the buildings that I mentioned or the empty rooms, as a pressure relief valve while we go through to build the homes that we need. Because homelessness is going through the roof, which means the economic costs are going to be going higher than what the report probably estimated. And as a country, long term down the track, if it gets so big and you put on top of that the NDIS, where the cut's going to happen? Probably at the service level. That means our values, our Australian values, get watered down. We are heading for a lose-lose unless we collectively raise this issue and create respectful unrest by generate the political self-interest on both sides of politics. This is not it's a bipartisan approach in the long-term interest of Australia.
Thanks, Rob. Maggie Shambrook has another question, which I love. The voice of those affected need to be included in designing responses based on needs and aspirations, not just on what others decide that what they need. We need to be part of the solution also, don't we? How do you create mechanisms at a systems level to engage with these cohorts who are currently negatively impacted by the cost of housing and poor standards of that housing? Are there mechanisms by which we engage those primary beneficiaries of more affordable housing?
Yeah, we get approaches all the time because people hear about what we're doing and what, we are private sector, we are in the property space, if you want to sort of say that, but we always work with CHPs that are in that social space. That's their expertise, it's not ours. So when we get approached by people, we forward them across to the organisation that we deal with, say, can you help out? That is not a skill that we've got, and we've got to recognise what our strengths and our weaknesses are, but we always work with the CHPs that have got those skills because, again, collaboratively is the only way we can solve the problem. They, as much as some actually build and develop, the private sector probably does it maybe a little bit better, maybe not. But we don't have any skills in that space. That's why we collaborate. No one's got all the answers. We have to do it by working together. I hope that answered the question, but yeah, so we don't exclude them at all, but we work with people that have got that exposure.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. And as a follow-up, Anthony Pham has got a question. What is the private sector appetite for investment into specialist disability accommodation?
Well, again, I'm on the summer housing. We used to be summer housing. Now it's called Liberty Housing Boards for 7 years since the inception. So we've now created funds that have delivered 400 plus special disability homes for people. So again, and the super funds have been part of that. We've raised, I think it's $400 million for SDA housing. So the market is there with the NDIS, but it needs to be marketed and done it in a way that it actually is financially viable. So that sector seems to be coming on board. So we have, as I said, as summer housing now, not as housing all Australians, albeit it's the same sort of housing continuum. There's a lot of interest in private sector capital. I know Lighthouse Infrastructure have invested with St George in affordable housing in New South Wales. We're slowly waking up these large financial institutions. Once they see that the returns just meet the threshold, the purpose is so strong that they're happy to invest, but it needs to be done at scale. They don't want a $50 million development. They want a $500 million development because it takes the same resources to do both. So it's always a scale issue with the super funds.
Very interesting. Thank you. Rob, we're nearly at time, but I wanted to just close off on a bit more of a positive note. There's been a lot of challenge and a lot of problems to solve, and the need for a systems approach and to apply systems thinking is really important, as well as the values of collaboration and working in partnership. But what's your vision for Housing All Australians? As we work together to tackle some of these problems, what does the future look like with secure, affordable housing for everyone?
Well, you asked me two questions then in some ways. What's my vision for Housing All Australians? The first one is to be out of existence. That's the reality, because unless we do that, we're just going to be there forever. But what I'm saying is that we need to look at housing as not actually housing. We need to look at it as infrastructure for a prosperous country. If you're starting a new mine in Western Australia, what's the first thing you put? Housing. Without housing being there, you're not going to attract the workers. Housing is fundamental economic and social infrastructure for a future prosperous country. And by providing the housing, people have a chance to maximize their inclusion in society by becoming productive. If they are not given those fundamental human needs, they become welfare dependents ultimately. So to me, it's a bit of an economic no-brainer to provide housing for people to allow them to become productive citizens, as well as all the other benefits of well-being and all that stuff, right? So it's changing in a way from where we perceive it today as a fundamental human need. Because without that human need, as you mentioned earlier, we have unintended human consequences that span to physical, mental health, family violence, family justice, all that stuff. It costs money and has social implications. It's good business to invest in housing first.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Rob. And Rob, thank you very much for taking the time out to speak with us today. We really enjoyed the conversation, and there's been a lot of interest and some really good questions coming through the crowd. I just also wanted to thank everyone for attending this afternoon. We'll be making a recording available of this webinar, and we'll be emailing out to all those that have registered to the session. So look forward to receiving a video on demand version of today's webinar. Alongside that, we'll also send the Give Me Shelter report links, as well as, Rob, your new report, Unlocking Private Sector Capital for Affordable Housing, a model for PRADS. So for everyone on the call, look forward to that. We'll have that circulated in a few days. But on behalf of everyone, I just wanted to thank you, Rob, for your time, and any final words from you?
No, but if anyone is out on this call for the private sector and they've got skills in planning, architecture, all that stuff, contact us through the info@housingallaustralians.org.au, because again, come on board and be part of this private sector movement to help vulnerable people with housing.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, everyone. Wishing you a wonderful week.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.